everyone, and welcome once again to Tuesday's Wrestling Talk here on Pro Wrestling Inside and Out. We are live. We are with Jack Lord, and my name is Brent West, and we will be talking about Mr. Wrestling number 2. Jack, when the name Mr. Wrestling number 2 comes up, what goes through your mind?
Well, anybody that follows me knows that 2 and Mass Superstar were my inspirations for going over from just being a ring guy to being an in-ring guy. And man, nothing but the highest respect for 2. I learned a lot from him. I took that knee a few times, and he liked me because I'm still here. So.
Yes, one time he was wrestling against Mr. Wrestling Tim Woods, and I think it was in Miami or Tampa, and he gave the knee lift to him, and he blacked both of Mr. Wrestling's eyes during the thing. He hit him right in the nose, and he because Wrestling 2 made sure when he gave you the knee lift that you knew you got the knee lift. There's no doubt about it. Wrestling 2 is the only wrestler throughout my years that he was my hero. There was no other wrestler that I wanted to meet. There was no other wrestler that I wanted, and we got to meet him. And it was 1978. And Dad said, "Well, we're gonna let you meet Wrestling 2." We went to Rome, Georgia on a Thursday night, and we met Wrestling 2. Now, during the same time we were meeting him, we were going to start making trips for Wrestling 2. So I can remember him setting us down. He got 2 chairs, and he put the 2 chairs up, and he said, "Now listen, boys," he said, "we're going to start making some trips together. And if anybody asks you throughout the trips," he says, "you just say that that's my uncle. That's my uncle." And he said, "if you tell anybody who I am going to whip you, and I am going to whip you good." And he meant it, and we knew he meant it because that mask meant more to Wrestling 2 than anything. I mean, we would make trips with him, and we would drive down. We'd be there 15, 20 minutes driving down the road. He'd still have that mask on. And Dad asked, "Are you going to take that mask off?" He says, "No, I think there was somebody following back there." That's how much there was wrestlers that said they never, ever saw Wrestling 2 without his mask. And
I never did.
I mean, he cared about that wrestling. You know, I told people one time there was a tag team, and I can't even remember their Blackhearts, I believe they were the name of World Championship Wrestling. They would walk around without their mask on, and I would tell them, I said, "Man, Wrestling 2 would beat you both if he saw that." He was something else. Wrestling 2, without a doubt, was one of the probably one of the greatest wrestlers of all time, masked wrestlers of all time. I put him on number 1 as masked wrestlers, and here he is right here. This picture was probably took sometime in 1980. The robe that you see was made by his wife, Olivia Walker. She also made the robes for Ric Flair, Greg Valentine. I mean, she was such a talented person, and she also made them for Charo, and made a couple for Dolly Parton. Actually, she did some great stuff. I want to talk just a little bit about Wrestling 2, and I will get to the people who have come on and said something. I want to talk about Wrestling 2, and I want to talk about his start. Johnny Walker was wrestling in Nick Goulas's territory in 1973. He was actually about 3 nights before he becomes Wrestling 2. He is wrestling against Jerry Novak, David Novak, with Jim Kitt, the Bounty Hunters, and it's against Rubberman Johnny Walker and Bearcat Brown. And this would be in Chattanooga, Tennessee at the Memorial Auditorium. And a couple of days later, he would end up in Waycross, Georgia on January 22nd, 1973. Mr. Wrestling number 2 would appear for the first time. And he would go against a wrestler by the name of the Grappler, which was kind of ironic since the first time he ever wrestled, he was the Grappler under a mask. And this was in working for Eddie Graham. Did you ever see any of Johnny Walker's matches on YouTube, Jack?
Yeah, I sure have. Sure is.
And people say he never drew as Johnny Walker, but there was times that he worked for Nick Goulas that he did very well, and he is one of the few wrestlers that does not say anything bad about Nick Goulas. He said Nick Goulas took care of him because at the time, Wrestling 2 also owned a filling station in Chattanooga, Tennessee. So I guess he gave that up when he came to Georgia because he worked full time. I don't think he was working full time at that time. And a guy named by the name of Leo Garibaldi is the guy that gave him the mask and gave him the character. Now, a lot of people have said, and Jack, we talked about this, a couple of people, we won't go into through the people, but they said they're the ones that there's a lot of people that will tell you that they created Mr. Wrestling 2. But Leo Garibaldi is the person that did it. He is the man behind it because there was, and Jack, I'll let you tell the story of why they decided to make a Mr. Wrestling number 2.
Well, Tim Woods, Mr. Wrestling, was an extremely popular character at the time. And they were wanting him in Florida, they were wanting him in Georgia, they were wanting him in the Carolinas. And he just really was stretched too thin to handle all the demands, for his bookings. So it was determined that, hey, let's make another Mr. Wrestling and align them up a little bit and get that rub from Tim Woods, which they did, and history has been made.
Yes, he was. There's no doubt. Wrestling 2 was the knee lift was. He got that over like no one. And not only did he get it over in Georgia, but he got it over really big time in Mid-South Wrestling. I want to say hello to some people that have come on. Angela Hinton Harvey. Hey, Jack Lord.
Hey, Angela.
David Bean, thank you so much for coming on here. We appreciate it. Charles, how are you doing? Mr. Wrestling number 2. He was one of the greats. So if you're on here right now and you don't know who Wrestling 2 is, we're going to give you a couple of months of his matches, his first couple of matches, and then we'll just talk generically about Wrestling 2 and what he meant to professional wrestling in general. Jackie Rosedale, greatest clean wrestler in Georgia wrestling history. And I would agree with Jackie. He was that. Jordan Carberson said, I've heard Mass Superstar talk a lot about him. Yeah, they had some great matches. They actually had maybe 3 different runs together, I think, in Georgia. And every time it drew very, very good. There was never a time it didn't draw. David Lawson, Wrestling 2, Mass Superstar, epic feud of all time. And those matches, I would say, and I've said this before, a couple of my matches, if I had a top 10 list, and I do, Wrestling 2 and Dick Slater would be number 1. And then they had a series of matches. They had some in 76, and they came back and had another one in 77. And those are the greatest matches I've ever witnessed. And then Wrestling 2 and Superstar has to be in that category. Don't you agree, Jack, that those were probably the best matches of all time?
Yeah, well, like I say, they inspired me. Those matches between 2 and Superstar, what got me to change my way of thinking and want to get in there. And
yeah, they were
to this day, the favorite picture I've ever had made with anybody was with both of them at the same time.
There was no. Yeah, that's. I treasure the time we got to make trips with Wrestling 2. There were some good trips, and as we get on part 2, part 3, we'll tell some stories of Wrestling 2 and some of the things we did on trips back and forth in Atlanta and in Continental Wrestling while he was there. Terry, good evening, gentlemen, and to you, Jack. Well, evidently you're not a gentleman, Jack.
Terry's just mad because I can still beat him. I think he's the only one I can beat. But
hello, Stephanie Wood, Dothan, Alabama. Stephanie Wood, how are you doing? It said, I love to watch him in Columbus, Georgia. Wrestling 2 loved Columbus, Georgia, and he also loved Fred Ward. There's no doubt they had a great relationship with each other and some great matches in Columbus. And I think, Jack, that's where you see most of your matches, wasn't it?
Yeah, I'd seen what we call outlaw wrestling before I was stationed there, but those Wednesday night shows introduced me to wrestling at a level that I had never experienced before. You know, it's one thing to watch it on TV, but man, seeing those guys perform in person, it was mind blowing, and I've been hooked ever since.
Lynn Gross, is that how you say Lynn Gross? Or good evening, hey Jack.
Hey, Lynn.
Tim Tripp, remember he had the $1 million knee lift. Yes, and
I have the receipt for it.
in Louisiana they got that thing over better than they did in Atlanta. Bill Watts was such a genius when it comes to the knee lift, to getting that knee lift over. He would do the thing where he would get a sack. I guess it was a sack of maybe sand or something, and he would hit that thing, and that thing would break open, and then somebody else would do it, like Magnum TA, and he wouldn't do nothing. He said, I'll just stand back here. Let me show you how it's done. And he'd hit it, and that thing would break open. It was tremendous the way Bill Watts got the knee lift over. I'm not saying it wasn't over in Georgia, but they got it over while they were in Louisiana, no doubt. Rita, how are you doing? Thank you so much for watching. We'll be telling you a little bit about Mr. Wrestling number 2. So we're going to tell a couple of more matches that he had in 1973 when he first started. Larry Brock, one of the greatest referees of all time. Fred Ward was one of a kind. Larry, we're going to have to talk about, because I know you went over there and worked with him for a couple of times, and I know you came to Atlanta a few times, I remember, and refereed on TV. So we'll have to talk about that at some point. So let's talk a little bit about a couple of more matches that Wrestling 2 had during this in 1973 when he first started. And I will tell you, from what I have heard, I mean, I was only 3 years old, so I can't tell you a lot about it. I was only 3, but from what I was told by Dad, he was not working for Georgia Championship Wrestling at the time. He was working for Ann Gunkel. He was working for the opposition at the time. So he wasn't there, but he knew what was going on. He knew what was happening. And he said that Wrestling 2 got over almost instantly. I mean, he just got over. And he would go to Savannah, Georgia, and Mr. Wrestling 1 and 2. Let me throw a picture up. Mr. Wrestling 1 and 2. Now, this is not 1973. I couldn't find a picture of Wrestling 1 and 2 in 1973. But they would go on January the 23rd, 1973, at the Civic Center in Savannah, Georgia. Mr. Wrestling 1 and 2 would have a mask versus mask match and go against the Zodiac. The Zodiac was actually Bob Orton Sr. And he would, let me throw this comment off so we can see Bob Orton. He was actually the Zodiac, and they would go against the Zodiac and the Grappler, and the Zodiac would lose his mask, and it would come out to be Bob Orton Sr. And then on January the 26th, 1973, in Atlanta City Auditorium, Mr. Wrestling 1 and 2 would defeat Sputnik and Rocket Monroe. Now, Jack, you know this. The Monroes were over in Georgia. And during that time, they were over huge in Georgia. So for Wrestling 2 to come right in there and go right against the Rocket and Sputnik. Did you ever meet Rocket Monroe? I know I never met Sputnik, but did you ever meet Rocket?
No, I never had the opportunity.
Oh, he was I thought I knew professional wrestling until I sat down and because I grew up in it, so I thought I knew something about professional wrestling until I sat down with Rocket Monroe, and he gave a lesson that. I was in Riverdale, Georgia, and I think he was part of the police department there in Riverdale, and he was working a show. Jimmy Powell had it, and he sat me down and he said, "Watch this match tonight." And he was going to work the leg. He said, "I'm gonna have Tim Berger. I'm gonna let him work the leg the whole match." He said, "Watch how this finish works." And I'll have to tell that story because it's a long story, but Rocket Monroe knew what he's doing. So to be able to Wrestling 2 to come in, only be there for a week, 2 weeks, and go against them and get a win on them, that was very important to build Wrestling 2 up as being a major wrestler and a major superstar at that time. He would go on January the 30th, 1973 in Savannah, Georgia, and go against the Zodiac again. Now, You might want to ask, well, I thought he lost the mask. Well, back in those days, because the TV would play the very next week, he had not lost. He had not lost the match yet, and I don't think back then that I don't believe they, today they'd have the mask versus mask match in every town. I don't think they did that back then. I don't think that was a thing they did back in the early '70s because they try to give it a more of a legitimate. Don't you agree with that, Jack?
Yeah.
Then he would go to Griffin, Georgia. And I believe Doug Smith, and I'm not for sure, but do you know in the early '70s, do you know who Doug Smith is, Jack?
I remember the name, but
he had the building. He was the local promoter in Griffin, Georgia. Now, I don't know if he was the local promoter in 1973, but I'd like to get him on here. He is on Facebook, and I'd like to get him on here and talk about this because I do believe he was the promoter at the time, and I believe he refereed a little bit for Georgia Championship Wrestling. But they would go to the Sports Palace. It was called the Sports Palace in Griffin, Georgia, and the Zodiac and Wrestling 2 would go, and they would have a no contest. And then he would go back to Waycross, Georgia. Jerry Oates, a man that you know very well, Jack, would team with Wrestling 2 to take on Tarzan Tyler and Norvell Austin. I don't think a lot of people realize how long Norvell Austin had actually wrestled. Had you ever talked to Jerry Oates about his time, the early days in Georgia?
Now, I was around him quite a bit. As always in the dressing room, we never got to have a lot of personal conversations there.
The Georgia Championship Wrestling at this time. Now you got to remember there was I wouldn't say it wasn't like the Southeastern problems with the talent. It wasn't talent trying to take over a wrestling company. It was just two promoters fighting with each other, and both promoters did well. It wasn't like one did better than the other. They both did well. It wasn't like the Nick Goulas, Jerry Jarrett thing where, Jarrett was just doing great business and Nick Goulas wasn't. They were both doing well. And even in the end, they were still doing well. It was just that Jim Barnett came along, and Jim Barnett was a very, he could talk you into anything. And he was that good. There's no doubt. Then on February 13th, 1973, in Macon, Georgia, Bob Armstrong and Wrestling 2 would team with each other, and they would defeat Butcher, Brannigan, and Tank Morgan. Now, Bob Armstrong was over at this time as well. So to put him with that, and I want to throw up a picture right now of a man that was the promoter in Columbus, Georgia, and Macon, Georgia, and Albany, Georgia, and that is Fred Ward. Fred Ward was a great wrestling promoter. Most people liked him. I think that there was times that Ole Anderson didn't like him, but that was all right because there was time that Ole Anderson didn't like a lot of people. But but Fred Ward was a great wrestling promoter, and you went to see a bunch of matches, Jack, didn't you?
Yeah, I was there for 2 years, and I think I missed one show during that whole time. So yeah. Great shows, great promotion, great guy. He was always talking to everybody, love that.
Now, I'm going to tell you that in 1973, the Sports Arena in Atlanta was still going strong, and Wrestling 2 on February 23rd, 1973, Wrestling 2 defeated Hans Smith. I believe, and I could be wrong, but the first time I ever saw Wrestling 2 wrestle, I believe was in the Sports Arena in Atlanta. Now, I'm not for sure this is true because I believe this would have been 1976. So it could have been in another building. But this is the first time I ever remember seeing Mr. Wrestling 2 wrestle. It was Mr. Wrestling 1 and 2 against Ole and Gene Anderson. And if you notice, Jack, when Wrestling 2's mask could be pulled it could almost be pulled the whole length of the ring. I mean, I just remember that was vividly, they had that mask and they pulled it and they couldn't get it off. And I mean, I'll never forget the comeback that Wrestling 2 made because when he touched his mask, it was like touching the Long Ranger's mask. I mean, he made a fiery comeback.
He was legit about that. If he wasn't his idea, you better not touch it.
But that's the first match I can remember ever Mr. Wrestling 1 and 2 against Ole and Gene Anderson. And it sticks with me today of how the people responded to Wrestling 2. And I know this was 1976 because that's kind of the first times that I can really have memories of wrestling is 1976. Before then, it's just a blur. But I can just remember that being my first match, and I can just from that point on, I was in love with Wrestling 2, and he was definitely my hero and someone. Though I never got a Wrestling 2 mask. You would think I at least had one of those at some point in my life.
I know a guy.
I would have loved to have a Wrestling 2 mask during that time. Now on February 24th, 1973, the WTCG studios in Atlanta, Georgia, Rocket Monroe would go against Wrestling 2, and Wrestling 2 would defeat him. Now, this would be setting up for the sports arena because at the time, Sputnik Monroe was the Georgia heavyweight champion. So basically what had happened, if he could beat Rocket, he would get a title match against Sputnik Monroe in the sports arena in Atlanta, Georgia. And this would be March 2nd, 1973. And Wrestling 2 would win his first Georgia heavyweight championship. And this was huge because the Georgia heavyweight title, and Jack, you know this even in the 80s, that belt meant as much as the world heavyweight title
did. It really did.
I mean, they really got it over. Let me show you also before then, though, something I missed is there was a guy by the name of Bobby Shane. He would eventually become the King, Bobby Shane. This is from a program that would be later on. It would be, I believe, the first or the second Omni show. And this is the ringsider with his, and I believe that's a Cadillac that he had won. And because they had a lot of Cadillac tournaments back then in 1973. So whoever was booking, I think it was Leo Garibaldi, he must have loved the Cadillac tournament because they did that a lot. But you see some of the people that were on here, the Infernos was there at the time. But he had a match, and I don't know that he defeated Bobby Shane on that night, but this would help him get over in Georgia tremendously of having a match with Bobby Shane, because Bobby Shane was really over at the time. Let me show you a program, and this would have been when Wrestling 2 actually won. This is the night that he actually won the Georgia Heavyweight Championship. You see Sputnik Monroe, or he would have been to go against the Zodiac. And this was a sellout. From what I've got wrote down, it sold out the sports arena, and I'm not for sure how many people the sports arena held. It didn't really say. It just said it was a sellout. And then on March 7th, 1973, at the Municipal Auditorium in Columbus, Georgia, Big Bill Dromo, man, he was over in Georgia. Yeah. And Mr. Wrestling 2 went against Sputnik Monroe and Rocket Monroe. And at some point during this time, they won the Southeastern Tag Team Championship, which I believe might have been, I don't know that they had the Georgia Tag Team Championship yet. I believe they only have the Southeastern belts. But let's look at Wrestling 2 right there. Jack, do you have any other memories of Wrestling 2 that you could share with us? That a match that you just went and saw and said, you know what, I would like to, in my time, I'd like to have a wrestling match as good as that.
Well, I've said that I saw him for the first time in Columbus. I think that was February of maybe 1980, I believe. And it was Superstar in Wrestling 2 in a steel cage. And that match was just off the chain for me. I mean, it was just great. It was so believable. And I remember turning to my first wife, who was with me at the time, and looked over at her, and I said, all right, I've played around this long enough. This is what I'm going to do. Now, at the time, Grant, I still had 4 years left in the Army that I had to commit to, but I knew that this was where I was going. And it was because of that match, because of those two guys.
Let's catch up on some Donovan Graham. Always thought 2 was a heel. Also, the pro was the greatest masked wrestler in Dothan. And Mobile would have loved to see mask versus mask, the wrestling pro versus wrestling 2. That would have drew tremendous money in Dothan. Don't you agree, Jack?
I do. I do.
Because
And Pro was great. He came out of retirement. They did a little short-lived TV out of Montgomery, and Pro had come out of retirement to try to help him a little bit. I got to wrestle him on that one TV taping.
Yeah, he was over at Dothan. I mean, there's no doubt about it. You know, I didn't really get to see him, but even years later in 1983, when we first went to Alabama, people would still talk about him, and that's how over he was in that territory. And Michael Calloway, agree. The matches between 2 and Slater were what got me hooked on Georgia wrestling. Yes, the baby bonnet matches, the I'm the Turkey mask matches was tremendous, and they did the same thing with Bob Orton Jr. in Augusta, Georgia. But in Dothan, we got Columbus's Fred Ward TV on Channel 3 station from Albany back in the 70s. Georgia Championship Wrestling in the 70s, I think, was the best time. I think from 76 to 79, I think that was probably the great time for Georgia Championship Wrestling. And they did some great stuff, which was very, very hard to follow by the 80s, though. As good stuff as they had, it was very hard. Scott Patterson, Solomon, Dothan, Alabama, the Farm Center when I was young, and I got to escort him to the ring and hold his title belt. Now, that is a great memory. That is a great memory to have, Scott. So cherish that memory. Mr. Wrestling 2, as I said, one of the greatest wrestlers, masked wrestlers of all time. Tammy, how you doing? A great wrestling friend and a great friend back in the 80s when Continental Championship Wrestling. James Meeks, when did Mr. Weaver, Wrestling 2, stop wrestling for Nick Goulas? I think he's talking about Walker, isn't he?
Yeah.
He stopped working in 1973. Let's see. Let me bring this up. It would have been only like 3 days. He had 3 days in between. So he came to Waycross, Georgia on January 22nd, 1973 and became Wrestling 2. So about 3 days before then, he was actually working in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Now, during this same time, now I don't know if a lot of people knew this, but during this same time when he was wrestling as Mr. Wrestling number 2 in Atlanta, he was also going to Florida and he was wrestling as Johnny Walker for Eddie Graham. And it was during this same time period. And so a lot of people said he didn't draw a lot of money, but he drew enough in Florida that they brought him back, because what had happened was he was the grappler. He got his mask took off. He turned from heel to babyface, and he became partners with Cowboy.
I think Brent's kind of froze up again here. Give him just a second to catch up here, because we're coming up near the end of what we're going to be doing tonight. Anybody that's got any questions, though, heck, hit us up here. We'll be more than happy to answer anything.
All right, we're back.
There he is. I've been covering.
We're back. I am having router problems, and I've got a new router coming tomorrow. So hopefully this doesn't happen after today. Make sure if you're going to do a show, make sure you have a new router, because it'll help you out tremendously. I think now we're losing Jack over here. Let's get some more. Dana Pruitt. Hello, how you doing? Thank you so much for being a part of Pro Wrestling Inside and Out. Jordan asked, so wasn't Fred Ward known for a funny style handshake? I don't know. I only met Fred Ward maybe 3 times the whole time that Dad worked for Georgia Championship Wrestling. So he was always busy, and so we never really did it. Charles offered a fiery comeback. Yes, Wrestling 2 had a fiery comeback. There is no doubt he had that. I'd like to tell a story about wrestling too. Terry, we need to get you on here. And when we do actually a part 2, 3, 4, because it's going to take a long time to get through Wrestling 2's career. Because once we get into 1990, 76, 77, there's a lot of stories that can be told because I remember those vividly. So we'll get you on here and we'll let you talk. And we just got to make sure you can get on. For some reason, some people can get on, some people can't. We've not figured out why some people can get on, some people can't get on our show like we're getting on. Who was more over in Georgia in the late 70s, early 80s, Tommy Rich or Wrestling 2? I remember it being about even. Money-wise, Wrestling 2, me and Jack talked about this. Money-wise, I think Mr. Wrestling 2 drew more money than anybody in Georgia. I really believe from 1973 till at least 1984, Wrestling 2 drew more money than Tommy Rich did. But now Tommy Rich was over. I mean, don't you agree, Jack?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he was over huge. I've said before about, before music, this was, that time period before music coming out, entrance music. And Tommy could, as soon as you saw that blonde head coming out of that dressing room, man, I mean, people would just explode. He was over. He was over.
Yeah. And Wrestling 2 was. So
also was.
I think that you have to look at you would have to look at longevity. I think Wrestling 2 had a longer span that he drew money in Georgia. But Tommy Rich had this. I mean, he got his clothes tore off the first time he went to Ohio. They had to go buy him new clothes. He got his clothes tore off while he was there. So that was on his way in the building, not on his way to the ring. That's how over Tommy Rich was. So Randy Hogan. Hello, Randy Hogan.
Hey, Randy.
David Lawson, why did 2 stay with Vince after Black Saturday? I talked to Wrestling 2 about that. They actually gave him a bill of goods and they told him what they were going to do with them, and they never did anything they said they were going to do with them. They promised him promised him a rose garden, and then didn't do anything with him. So he didn't stay long, and I don't believe to this day he likes Vince McMahon. Am I correct about that, Jack?
Yeah, I remember seeing him when Vince tried to put him on the actual WWF programming, and you could tell he was not happy being there and didn't stay but just a few weeks. I think I might have saw him twice, if that many times on the programming.
Yeah, he didn't. I don't think he liked it from what I remember making trips with him. He did not like Vince McMahon. Chuck Childress, good times. Yes, it was very good times. That whole time was great. David Lawson said 2 versus the Assassin was a great feud also. Yes, I had just watched a video today of Jody and Wrestling 2. They were doing an interview at the set, and it started out very cordial, and they had a great interview, and then all at once, I mean, this fight breaks out, and they take off Wrestling 2's mask, and Wrestling 1 comes back, and it's a real good. And they drew some good houses with Mr. Wrestling 1 and 2 against the Assassins, which was Jody Hamilton and Randy Colley. Some people would remember him as Moondog. Which one of the Moondogs was he? He wasn't Spot.
Was it Rex?
Rex, Moondog Rex. James Meek said, what was the reason why Wrestling 2 never got a world title run? Him and Harley Race had great matches together. I don't think Wrestling 2 would have been champion. I really don't think he would want to be champion. I really don't. Let me bring in somebody that can. My brother is on here. Let me see if I can get him on here. He just came on.
Oh, wow. I mean, I'm really big. My head is humongous.
Well, are you saying you don't like
left out? Hold on.
No, I'm okay.
Okay.
Well, there you go.
I was just too close to the. It was very big. It's humongous, and I'm also very bright tonight. Okay. All right. So what was the question? I have just been on the phone with Bill Dundee. It was almost an hour and a half. That he was very talkative tonight. So that can tell you what we will be in for tomorrow night. I can tell you that much right now.
Well, let me tell a little bit more about his matches in Augusta Armory. The Augusta Armory, I didn't know they had matches in the Augusta Armory in Augusta, Georgia, on March 15th, 1973. Lou Thez against Mr. Wrestling number 2. And Wrestling 2 has said so many times that Lou Thez, Pat O'Connor, Dick Hutton, and there's one other champion, and I'm going to leave them out. That was the people that he really looked up to. And so this match was probably a great match in Augusta. And then in the Atlanta City Auditorium, and I believe I have the program for it right here. It was on, let's see, what does that say? May 16th, 1973, the NWA Georgia Heavyweight Championship. Loser will unmask. Well, I thought Zodiac already got unmasked, but I guess he didn't. Went against Mr. Wrestling number 2. Maybe he only got unmasked in whatever town I was telling you about, Waycross, Georgia. That's the only town he got unmasked.
Yeah.
That was that was just exclusively for Waycross, so he could not wear his mask in Waycross. Now, outside of Waycross, he could, but just not in Waycross. And notice who else was on this program. It says Bobby Shane, the king of wrestling, demands his crown. Woo, Bobby Shane, he was great.
Yes, he was good. And then at the Atlanta City Auditorium, I think I've got this. Maybe this is the next one. As you will see, it was a Tuesday Sports Arena Spectacular, Texas Death Match, Bobby Shane versus Bob Orton Sr. So at this point, he didn't have a mask, so he must have been wrestling as Bob Orton Sr. in the Zodiac. Yeah, I guess it was just according to where he was at. But you see a Cadillac tournament, which they love the Cadillac tournaments. Mr. Wrestling 2 against Bud Roll, Lorenzo Parente against Cowboy Bill Watts, Bobby Hart versus Big Jim Wilson. We won't even speak about Jim Wilson. And Ben Justice against Bob Orton Jr. We'll have to tell the Jim Wilson story one day, but we won't do it today. We're talking about Mr. Wrestling number 2.
I wonder how come they had reduced admission for that particular event. Notice that $2.50, $2, and $1. I wonder what happened.
Because they had the war going on at the time, maybe?
If possible, yeah, it might be.
Here is another tonight's All-Star Wrestling card that had Wrestling 2 on it. The World's Heavyweight Championship, Harley Race against Mr. Wrestling. It says Mr. Wrestling to unmask before this match. Cowboy Bill Watts against Jack Briscoe. Bob Duncan against Bob Armstrong. The Fabulous Moolah against Joyce Grable. 20 men over the top. And there is a play. Oh, there it is. It's the Infernos against Mr. Wrestling number 2 and Bob Orton Jr.
Well, that's a turn of events, huh? Because it was just recently that Bob Orton Sr. was wrestling against him, and now he's tag team partner against the Infernos, and that's a non-title match. And they're the Infernos are the Georgia Tag Team Champions, it looked like.
You know, it's funny because it moved around, but you got to remember, back then, in each different town, they could have done completely different stuff.
Sure, because they had their individual TV shows played in each one. Look at who else was on that card, just real quick. One of my favorites, Bearcat Brown, was on that card, huh?
Yeah, Bucknet Monroe
on there. Oh my goodness, what a card! That was a great card.
And here's another one from Fred Ward. You've got you got 18-man over the top rope battle royal. Tarzan Tyler goes against Mr. Wrestling number 2. By that time, he's the Georgia Heavyweight Champion. Dynamite Jack Evans, Rocket Monroe against Ken Hula Glon and Leon Ogle. The Infernos go against Cowboy Bill Watts. I think that must be a whole match between all these against the Infernos, Bill Drummond, Bob Armstrong, which is the Columbus champion, Butcher Brannigan, Bobby Cash, which would have been Pork Chop Cash, Jerry Oates. I mean, that's a great card as well.
Right.
And so let's look at this one. This is Fred Ward promoter, Southeastern Tag Team Championship match. The Super Infernos against Cowboy Bill Watts and Bob Armstrong. Bobby Duncan and Bobby Shane against Jack Briscoe and Mr. Wrestling number 2. Peggy Patterson against, is that Tippy Wells?
Tippy Wells.
Tippy Wells.
All right, the old Tippy Wells. And then here's another one. This would have been from April 31st, 1973. Another over-the-top rope battle. Well, they loved the battle royals. They had a lot of battle royals. But Georgia Heavyweight Championship at stake. Mr. Wrestling 2 against Tarzan Tyler. And you've seen Jack Briscoe and those other Leo Ogle and Ken, which I don't know that I know who they are. But that's a great deal. And let's end that with a great picture of Mr. Wrestling number 2. Some great matches, and I will say that on March 25th in Atlanta and this would be at the Omni in Atlanta. They would have Mr. Wrestling 1 and 2 against Jack Briscoe and Cowboy Bill Watts, and that would have been March 25th, 1973. Mr. Wrestling 2, no doubt, one of the greatest masked wrestlers of all time. Roddy, you got any stories?
Well, there was a question, and I don't know if y'all answered it. What was the reason Wrestling 2 never got a world title run? And I think I got a good answer for that. They never have a world champion that is a masked man.
No.
It's none heard of. They just wouldn't do it. And that's the main thing. And even back then, they talked about it. 2 had have to take his mask off. But if you'll notice, there are no world champions as NWA world champions. There are none that have a mask on. It was not heard of. They just didn't do it.
Well, I want to share this. This is can I say it? This is from Southeastern Championship Wrestling. This is Harley Race, World Heavyweight Champion, and this is one of the times that Wrestling 2 would get a title match with Harley Race in Knoxville, Tennessee, at the Coliseum, and he's on the back of the program back then. But there's a bunch of this stuff as we get into part 2, 3, 4, 5. There's a bunch of this that we can.
There's some great matches I'm sure that's coming up with. Oh shoot, I forgot his name now. I was just thinking about him today. Buddy Colt is coming up, and you talk about a wrestler. Too bad for what he could have done if it wasn't for the accident. But Buddy Colt and Wrestling 2, they fired up Georgia, and that title went back and forth between 2 and Buddy Colt. And at the same time, Buddy Colt at one time was the Georgia Heavyweight Champion and co-holder of the Georgia Tag Team Champion at the same time. And Dad told me, and we never got a chance to watch Buddy Colt wrestle, but Dad said he was awesome, absolutely awesome.
Did you ever get to see him?
I've saw YouTube stuff, and I talk to Buddy occasionally on Facebook. Just a super guy. Maybe we can get him hooked in here to.
I'm gonna tell you he would have some great stories. And Dad said he was just phenomenal wrestler. I saw there's one match with him against Johnny Walker from Tampa, from the Florida, and that match is really, really great. And Buddy Colt was a tremendous wrestler, a true loss because of the accident, no doubt.
All right, before we sign out of here, does anybody have anything they want to add about Mr. Wrestling 2? Now, this is only the first, I think we covered, 4 months of the beginning of Mr. Wrestling 2's career. And this is just a part of it because soon Mr. Wrestling 2 gets into a argument with Mr. Wrestling, and it was over what we just saw, that he unmasked, Mr. Wrestling unmasked, to be able to get the World Heavyweight title match. And so a fight ensues, and for a couple of months, Mr. Wrestling and Mr. Wrestling 2 is in a feud with each other. So it's going to be interesting. So does anyone have any closing comments before we get off of here tonight?
Well, as I've said before, I don't think there've ever been. If I would contend that Wrestling 2 is the greatest masked wrestler of all time, as far as I'm concerned. He could convey emotion, and you didn't have to see his face, just with his body language. You could sit at the top of the building, and you know exactly what was going on in Wrestling 2, and that's the key of his talent, being able to make that connection with people no matter where he's at. And it's for me, that was who I grew up watching, Wrestling 2. And never have there been a better matches anytime ever. If they ever put them together, Ole and Gene Anderson against Wrestling 1 and 2, you can be sure that was going to be barn burner.
You know, if Brian can find this Wrestling 2 45, we've got to figure out how to play this. You know, and I think I remember that. But we got to figure out a way, because that would be spectacular to listen to. There's no doubt. Gary, thank you so much. We try our best to tell a little history of professional wrestling, and it takes a while, because you can't. Wrestling 2's. I don't want to just do it a little bit, this is the 2 matches he had in 1973, and these are the 2 matches he had in 1974. I would rather take the time and do a part 1, 2, 3, or 4 and really tell the story of Wrestling 2. And
hold it. There has been a disagreement and a protest launched on this channel that we must address.
All right, let's get down to it, because I do see it.
It cannot be left unsaid. All right,
Tammy, he definitely was a legend. Wrestling 2 was a legend, and this is the beginning of the legend of Mr. Wrestling number 2. Maybe that's what we should have said this tonight. The beginning of the legend of Mr. Wrestling number 2.
Right.
All right, now, Quentin, thank you so much. We have a great time doing it. It's a love affair for all 3 of us. I think that I can speak for Jack. I can speak for Rodney. The professional wrestling is something we love to do. For years, we were at least me and Rodney weren't able to even do this, because we were working for Co-Brother Circus for over 14 years. And so when we finally got out of the circus business, we knew that we wanted to do something in wrestling, and we wanted to tell some stories about the wrestlers that I believe Mr. Wrestling 2 deserves. And honestly, he deserves a lot of respect. Now, I'm waiting to get this, because I think Rodney's a little upset over here. I'm trying to.
This cannot be left undone right here.
All right, this is what he said. He said, "I have to disagree, Rodney. Jody Hamilton as the assassin number 1 was the best, in my opinion." Now, Gary, this is your problem now.
Gary, we must talk to you for a minute. Can I talk to you? Just come close to your computer. Slap you upside the head. You don't know what you're talking about. Jody Hamilton was not the greatest masked wrestler of all time. I mean, come on. With Wrestling 2, the Georgia heavyweight champion, how many times was he the Georgia heavyweight champion? Zip. I don't believe he was ever Georgia heavyweight champion. Georgia tag team champion, maybe. How many times was he North American champion? I don't think so. But no. I stand by what I said. I'll put my Wrestling 2 against your assassin anytime, any place, at the Omni, at the Atlanta City Auditorium, at the Mega
Friday night,
wherever you want to. Put him at.
Let's do it at the Atlanta City Auditorium.
At the Atlanta City Auditorium, that would be an amazing thing, wouldn't it?
They had the greatest atmosphere of any arena I've ever been.
That's right.
It broke my heart when they tore that down.
That was a sad day for Atlanta wrestling when they tore down the Atlanta City Auditorium. In fact, wrestling was never the same, really, for Atlanta since that. Oh, wait a second. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'll calm down. And
I
need to calm down. On there.
James Meeks said, "Tell him, Rodney."
I told him.
Charles laughing at you.
Any place.
He said he was the youngest wrestler ever to headline Madison Square Garden. I guess he's talking about Jody Hamilton.
You're talking about Jody Hamilton? Yeah. Ole Anderson said all about this needs to be said about New York and Madison Square Garden. That's all I have to say. He was right about that. Why should I have to go all the way up there when I can make just as much money in the Carolinas and in Georgia? And I rest my case. Thank you.
Well, Rodney, I think you started something down here. Everybody is ready for a fight down here on Tuesday night.
Somebody wanting to do it at a hotel room. That's a totally different situation with masks when you talk about hotel room.
Well, now Rita's telling us she has to go with Jody as well. So now, see, Rita, what are you starting tonight? You know, everything was real calm, cool, collective when me and Jack was on here, and then Rodney come on here, and he just causes grief.
Hold on, we got to give Rodney some CPR here.
Rita, I hate to say this to you, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart. You and Gary need to get together. Put you some assassin mask on.
If I
around
remember,
town.
If I remember correctly, I believe Rita lives in Greenville, which is also where Austin Idol lives. So.
Oh well, then. Oh yeah. Well, that says all we need.
William, if you're just coming in, you missed the promo or interview of Rodney. He was just telling somebody off. So if you missed it, I'm sorry. Go back and watch it.
And yes, I will personally quote Olia because there's occasionally he was right. So is the clock twice a day.
Gary says thanks, Mom, for sticking up for me. Good deal, Gary. I'm gonna tell you. See, now I'm gonna tell you, we shown how you just in 5 minutes you could create an angle right out of just saying the.
That's right. And I'll take my Mr. Wrestling team against your assassin team any day.
Well, now Tammy said you always cause trouble, and I think he was always the troublemaker. I never was.
I don't know what she's talking about. She must be more exact about her language there. I've never caused any trouble anywhere I went. Not today.
Running with the fire. doing the interview.
I got to go with this guy.
Yeah.
Well, folks, we do appreciate it for you coming on here today. We try to have fun while we're on here because wrestling was. If you didn't have fun in the wrestling business, you wouldn't have stayed in it for as long as Dad was in it for 32 years, 33 years, and we grew up in it and loved every moment of it. Well, okay, the WCW days maybe not, but the rest of the time we really enjoyed it. And I want to say hello to Alan Martin before we come off of here. Alan,
hey, Big Al.
We got to get you on here and talk wrestling. If we can figure out how to get people to learn how to get on here, we have a hard time with that.
Al can come to my house and we'll do it from here.
Yeah, that'd be great. Bill Dundee wants us all to get together sometime. So he's excited. I talked to his wife tonight. I'm telling you, yeah.
Road trip. We'll get Pat.
Yeah,
Pat's got a Corvette now. I'll ride with him.
Yeah.
It's in the name Assassin #1 and Mr. Wrestling #2. Now, see, James is saying that's the Assassin, but that was not Jody Hamilton, the Assassin.
Assassin #2. Tom Ernesto was.
Yeah.
Tom Ernesto was the Assassin #1. Now the original.
We win again. Thank you very much.
Sorry, James. I mean, we had to set you. Here's Tim Horner. Tim Horner was coming on. Quick story. I was working for Watts, and Wrestling 2 came in. I was young and asked Johnny to watch my match and give me advice. I was working Lynn Denton, the grappler. Lynn called a spot, tackle, drop down. He would go for a backdrop and told me to give him a knee lift. Oh, man. Which I did. What a butt chewing I got from Johnny using his for a hot spot. Yeah. Oh, Tim.
Yeah, high spot infringement. Oh.
I believe next Tuesday. I believe it's next Tuesday. Tim Horner will be with us right here live, and we will talk.
Oh boy,
Horner, and we'll get.
Gary will be challenging him too. I tell you right now.
He probably will. Oh, by the way, Brian Bodie Green was laughing Tim Horner at that. That is great stuff. Yeah, Wrestling 2 did not like you using knee lift, and he hated people who put a mask on and called himself Mr. Wrestling 2.
Yeah,
we will tell the story of Joe Powell, and as we get into a couple of what happened to Joe Powell for doing it, and it wasn't even his fault, but he should not have put the mask on. I guess he was trying to show anybody, if a booker comes to you or an owner comes to you and says, you want to be Wrestling 2, you tell them no, because I will beat you up. And he would, and he did. So, is there anything else we need to talk about before we leave tonight? Because we are running out of time.
Just for me, tomorrow night, Bill Dundee, we're going to be talking about Mid-South Wrestling 1984. Come on down, we'll have a good time. And I accept all challenges. We accept all challenges, including, and if you're not careful, we'll have a party and somebody's going to get slapped.
Hey.
That's what we're going to be doing tomorrow night.
I got a big shout out to Ricky and Robert. I'm showing their merchandise.
Hey.
Robert the other day.
Now, is those shirts on sale somewhere?
ProWrestlingTees.com, I believe, is where I got this one at. This was
Go to Pro Wrestling Tees. You know, we need some Pro Wrestling Inside and Out the T-shirts.
Yeah, we need some merch there. Yeah,
we do.
We need some.
I need a banner. I wish I
Yeah.
knew somebody that could do that.
I like the banner. That looks great.
Good. You know,
That looks good.
All right, folks, we appreciate it. Let's make sure we get
now.
Let's see. Did Hercules Hernandez use Mr. Wrestling for Watts as well? Yes, he did. He was actually Mr. Wrestling 2.
It's actually Wrestling 2. Yeah.
Mr. Wrestling 2, the original Mr. Wrestling 2 said, "Hey, I am the only Mr. Wrestling, so I'm going to be number 1." And he made Hercules Hernandez number 2, and that wasn't. Let's see, no assassin T-shirts available. Also.
I'd buy one.
Yeah, I would too. We need to get some of those. Gary, you need to work on that. See if you can talk to Jody Hamilton and make sure we get some. He said, get a hold of Charlie Smith. He has
that would be great. Yes.
And
James too, Charlie Smith. That would be great.
Charlie, say you one T-shirt for $10 or 2 for $40.
Oh, Charlie's got some stories though. He can tell us about
the war and everything.
I know we're never going to be able to get them, so I'll have to pull out the mic and the and call them on the phone. Because
but we can do that too.
I don't think we'll ever get them on here to the way we get on. There's no way we're getting Charlie Smith on that way. But I want to thank everybody. I want to thank you for being a part of this. It's Tuesday's Night Wrestling Talk, and we want to thank you so much for being a part of it. Thank you, Rodney, for coming on. I know you were on talking to Bill Dundee for the last hour and a half. Thank you, Jack, so much for being part of this each and every show that we do, and we appreciate it. And thank you all so much. And tomorrow, Bill Dundee, booking Mid-South Wrestling with Bill Dundee. He does return. And we thank each and every one of you for being a part of it. If you have not subscribed, if you're watching on YouTube and you've not subscribed, please do that and give us the old thumbs up and tell us that you like what we see. And if you're on Facebook, like and share, and we appreciate it. And we will see you later on. And thank you for being part of Pro Wrestling Inside and Out Live.